How did a small British car, built with a fraction of General Motors' budget, out-engineer America's mighty Chevrolet Corvette? The answer wasn't more horsepower. It was revolutionary engineering born at Le Mans. With race-proven aerodynamics, independent rear suspension, and technology years ahead of Detroit, the Jaguar E-Type didn't just challenge the Corvette. It forced the entire sports car world to rethink the future. By the late 1950s, Jaguar had already proven itself on the world's toughest racetrack. The D-Type, a purpose-built racer designed by aerodynamicist Malcolm Sayer, had won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 3 times between 1955 and 1957, beating factory teams from Ferrari and Mercedes-Benz with a fraction of their resources. But Jaguar's founder, William Lyons, wanted more than racing trophies. He wanted to sell that same speed and glamour to ordinary buyers, at a price that made Ferrari ownership look absurd. The problem was that no road car in Jaguar's lineup came close to translating the D-Type's competition-bred engineering into something a customer could drive to the shops on a Monday morning. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Chevrolet had spent the 1950s building the Corvette into America's answer to the European sports car. A V8-powered, fiberglass-bodied roadster that traded finesse for raw torque and all-American swagger, backed by the deep engineering budget of General Motors. Jaguar had no such budget. What it did have was Malcolm Sayer, the D-Type's aerodynamicist, and a stockpile of racing knowledge nobody else in the industry could match. Lyons handed Sayer an almost impossible brief. Take everything learned on the Le Mans winning D-Type, its aerodynamic shape, its lightweight monocoque construction, its independent suspension research, and shrink it into a road-legal sports car that could be built at volume, sold at a fraction of a Ferrari's price, and still humiliate anything else on the road. The result would be unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show in March 1961, and it would change what a production sports car was expected to do. Malcolm Sayer was not a typical car designer. He was an aerodynamicist and mathematician who had worked in the aircraft industry before joining Jaguar, and he treated body panels the way an aircraft engineer treats a wing. He shaped the E-Type's body using mathematical curve formulas rather than sketches, obsessing over drag reduction to a degree almost nobody in the automotive industry bothered with in 1961. But the shape was only half the story. Working alongside him was William Haynes, Jaguar's chief engineer, and a young suspension specialist named Bob Knight, who was given a brief just as demanding as Sayer's. Design a fully independent rear suspension, compact enough to fit inside a road car, at a time when nearly every sports car on Earth, including the Corvette, still relied on a solid rear axle borrowed from a truck. Meanwhile, engine designer Claude Bailey refined Jaguar's twin overhead cam XK Straight 6, a unit already proven in years of endurance racing, to deliver both real power and the kind of reliability a customer could trust for daily driving. Together, this small team was handed a mandate that sounded almost contradictory. Build a car with genuine Le Mans DNA, sell it at a price ordinary enthusiasts could afford, and make sure it could still be driven comfortably to work on a wet Tuesday morning. Where Detroit's engineers were solving for horsepower and straight-line speed, Sayer, Knight, Haynes, and Bailey were solving a much harder problem: how to make a race car's intelligence fit inside a road car's price tag. The first breakthrough was the body itself. Sayer's monocoque construction, a lightweight, load-bearing steel shell with a tubular subframe bolted on to carry the engine, was directly descended from the D-Type's racing chassis, and it made the E-Type dramatically stiffer and lighter than anything built around a traditional, separate frame. That shape wasn't just beautiful. Sayer's mathematically derived curves gave the E-Type a drag coefficient competitors could only guess at, letting the car slice through the air at speeds that made its claimed 150 miles per hour top figure genuinely believable on a public road, not just on a banked test track. Underneath that skin sat the second breakthrough: Bob Knight's independent rear suspension. while the Corvette and nearly every other sports car of the era still bolted a solid live axle across the back, a setup that hopped and skittered over bumps mid-corner, breaking traction exactly when a driver needed it most. Knight engineered a compact unit with coil springs, radius arms, and inboard disc brakes, mounted as a self-contained subframe that bolted directly to the monocoque. Each rear wheel could now react independently to bumps and cornering loads, keeping the tires planted on the road in situations that would send a live axle car sliding wide. It was one of the first genuinely independent rear suspensions fitted to a mass production car, and it changed what handling meant for an entire generation of sports cars that followed. The third piece was stopping power. Jaguar equipped the E-Type with disc brakes on all four corners, a technology the company had already proven in D-Type competition, where fade-resistant braking under sustained racing loads had been the difference between winning and crashing at Le Mans. American sports cars of the period, the Corvette included, were still leaning heavily on drum brakes that faded rapidly under repeated hard use. Reliable enough for a straight-line drag race, but a liability the moment a driver needed to shed speed lap after lap. The final piece tied it all together: steering feel. Jaguar fitted the E-Type with rack and pinion steering, delivering direct, immediate feedback through the wheel, in an era when many American performance cars still used slower, more isolated steering boxes designed for comfort over communication. Combined with near-perfect weight distribution and a chassis that weighed hundreds of pounds less than its American rival, the E-Type didn't just go fast in a straight line. It told the driver exactly what the tires were doing beneath them, through every corner, at every speed. Individually, none of these four decisions, the aerodynamic monocoque, the independent rear suspension, the four-wheel discs, the direct steering, was unique to Jaguar. What was unique was combining all four in one production car at a price that undercut a comparable Ferrari by more than half. Across the Atlantic, the Corvette that greeted the E-Type's arrival was still, mechanically, a product of the 1950s. The C1 generation Corvette leaned on a solid rear axle suspended by leaf springs, a setup borrowed almost directly from Chevrolet's passenger sedans, never designed with hard cornering in mind. Push it hard into a bend, and the axle would hop and skate over mid-corner bumps, breaking traction at precisely the moment the driver needed grip the most. Its brakes, still drums on most models through the start of the decade, worked well enough for a quarter-mile drag strip, but faded fast under the sustained, repeated braking of a real road course or a mountain pass, turning firm pedal pressure into a soft, worrying sponge after just a handful of hard stops. Its steering, geared for comfortable American boulevard cruising, filtered out much of the road feel a driver would need to place the car precisely at speed. None of this made the Corvette a bad car. It was genuinely quick in a straight line, backed by a thunderous small-block V8, and it embodied everything American buyers wanted from a sports car in 1961. Raw torque, dramatic styling, and unmistakable presence. But it was a car engineered to go fast, not necessarily to corner, brake, and communicate with precision. And against a rival built by a company that had spent the previous decade obsessively refining exactly those three things on the world's most demanding racetrack, that gap was about to become impossible to hide. The E-Type's competition credentials weren't theoretical. Just months after its Geneva debut, Formula One driver Graham Hill took a nearly showroom-stock E-Type to victory in its first race outing, at Alton Park in April 1961, beating dedicated sports racers straight off the production line, a result that stunned a paddock used to seeing road cars finish well behind purpose-built competition machinery. Privateers quickly followed. Racing E-Types turned up on grids across Europe and North America through the early 1960s, their independent rear suspension giving them a genuine advantage on tight, twisting road courses where a live axle car would be fighting for traction through every bend. Contemporary motoring journalists ran the two cars back-to-back on real roads and came away with a consistent verdict. In a straight-line sprint, a fuel-injected big-block Corvette could still outdrag a standard E-Type by a healthy margin. The Chevy's raw torque advantage was real, and Jaguar never pretended otherwise. But the moment the road began to twist, the story flipped. Where the Corvette's solid rear axle skipped and hopped over mid-corner bumps, forcing drivers to slow down and wait for the chassis to settle, the E-Type's independent suspension let it carry speed through the same corners with the composure of a car built specifically to survive 24 hours at Le Mans. Because, mechanically, it was. It's worth being honest about the E-Type's own limits here too. Its four-wheel disc brakes, while a genuine innovation for a production car in 1961, were pushed hard by the car's 140+ miles per hour top-end performance, and more than one road tester noted they needed careful, well-timed use on a fast, demanding circuit. The E-Type was never a flawless machine, but lap after lap, corner after corner, it did something no American sports car of its era could match. It let the driver trust the chassis completely, at speeds the Corvette's underpinnings simply weren't designed to handle. The strongest proof of the E-Type's impact wasn't a lap time, it was how the industry responded. At the 1961 Geneva Motor Show, Enzo Ferrari reportedly called it the most beautiful car ever made. Whether those exact words were spoken remains debated, but the E-Type's influence was undeniable. Just 2 years later, Chevrolet's new 1963 Corvette Sting Ray adopted independent rear suspension, while Porsche introduced the 911 with the same layout. The ideas Jaguar had brought from Le Mans were quickly becoming the new standard. The E-Type wasn't perfect. Its Moss gearbox was slow, the cabin was cramped, and it demanded careful maintenance. Yet those flaws couldn't overshadow its achievement. Jaguar combined independent rear suspension, four-wheel disc brakes, aerodynamic design, and race-proven engineering into a production car that ordinary enthusiasts could afford. Working with a fraction of Detroit's budget, Jaguar didn't simply build a beautiful sports car. It redefined what every modern sports car would soon become.